My experience is that different societies have very deep-rooted political cultures and traditions that extend far back in history, and for good and for bad, and that these cultures are real, they are persistent, they are different, they don't rank on an easy scale that this is the best and this is the worst like we want to do. And we need an approach. I very much like what you said and agree with it. There are different narratives that are held, and these different narratives have merit. And the solution in a world of different narratives is to speak with each other more than we do. We in the United States, and I say we, what I really mean is our political elites, do not speak with Chinese political elites except to point fingers or to yell at them or to do other things. We certainly don't even shake hands with Russian leaders or diplomats. But I've lived my whole career for 42 years of active duty listening to different narratives and seeing those perspectives from different sides and finding a lot of merit in the various positions and saying if you would sit down to speak with each other, we'd actually get somewhere. So let me be specific.
Okay.
China looks today not completely different from the Han Dynasty, a centralized administrative state. And with Confucian culture, with a tradition of excellence of the Mandarins. When I speak with Chinese senior officials, which I do often, they are the best informed professionals I know in the world. When I deal with them, they know their brief. They're sophisticated, well-trained, occasionally my students. And they believe in professional excellence of a centralized administrative state. And that political culture is more than 2,000 years old. When you are looking at Russia, it looks a lot like Putin looks a lot like a Tsar. It's not an accident. That is a culture of authority and a culture of tradition. When I look at my own country, the United States, it is a semi-democratic, white-dominated, hierarchical, racist society that aims to preserve privilege by the elites. That's how it was formed in 1787. It was a slave-owning, genocidal country, killing Native Americans for a white culture. But amazingly, it still looks that way, although we're much more diverse now than we were.
Let me ask you this, Jeff, because this is...
I want to point out that these are deep cultural distinctions.
Right.
But we shouldn't just simplify because we say democracy and you know, these are, yes, it's important. What's important is actually the details. As I mentioned last night, Plato, democracy, that was the last thing on his mind. That was the enemy. The plus was a philosopher king, of course,
right,
in the Republic. And for Aristotle, it was much more subtle and complex of a system of governance that mixed governance by the one, by the few, and by the many, but on the good side of the ledger. And one more point I want to make about democracy, because we're in a democracy forum where we treat democracy as the good. The most violent country in the world in the 19th century, by far, was perhaps the most democratic or second most democratic, and that was Britain. You can be democratic at home and ruthlessly imperial abroad. The most violent country in the world since 1950 has been the United States. It's been by far involved
Jeffrey,
in more,
stop
wait a
now.
minute, in more
Let's,
wars.
Jeffrey, Jeffrey, I'm your moderator, and it's enough.
Okay, I'm done. The single biggest mistake of President Biden is to say the great struggle of the world is between democracies and autocracies. The real struggle of the world is to live together and overcome our common crises of environment and inequality. My view is that we need a world that operates under two major charters. One is the United Nations Charter, and the second is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is our moral charter. That's a multilateral charter. It is based on the idea of international cooperation that was envisioned after the horrors of World War II. It is, in my view, the basis for peace. In 1990, the basis for peace, when Gorbachev called for the end of the Warsaw Pact, was the end of NATO, actually, as well, and Europe living under a European security framework, and that's what the OSCE could provide. I've never been a fan of NATO since the end of the Soviet Union. NATO was a military alliance of the United States created to defend against a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. And the United States and Germany promised Gorbachev in 1990 explicitly that with the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact and with the reunification of Germany, NATO would not expand eastward. That promise was immediately reneged by Clinton and then by Bush, and then it has continued under Obama and under Trump, up to and including NATO in the Black Sea, which, if anyone knows the history of the Black Sea, is absolutely viewed by Russia as the core of Russian security. And so it is a pure provocation, in my view. And it is a predictable outcome that we have this kind of explosion. So to my mind, prudence, that was the idea that I was emphasizing yesterday. Prudence, which is one of the four virtues, practical wisdom, it's often translated, or phronesis in Greek, means situational awareness, that you act in a way which is wise. And that's what we are lacking right now. And I know exactly why we're lacking it, because in 1992, the leaders in my country, many of my colleagues at Harvard and elsewhere, said, we are now the unchallenged colossus of the world. We can do what we want.
Jeffrey,
and just to say, wait, just let me, because he asked, I'm going to finish the answer, and then I will give the floor to you. Sorry. So, okay, just to say, if you say who made most of the wars of recent years, first, NATO bombed Serbia in 1999. UN, no way. The invasion of Iraq under complete lies, not misunderstanding, but lies. The CIA operation to overthrow Assad in 2009.
I think you've answered
the NATO mission to overthrow
God's sake.
Gaddafi. And then we say, how can anyone launch a war? Well, 4 of the last 5 came from the United States side. And NATO enlargement did as well. We need some balance and prudence. That's my point.
Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. I can tell you it's very easy for me to take this position because for 10 years I had the incredible honor to be special advisor to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and I always felt that I was advising Confucius. I really always felt that I was advising an extraordinarily wise man who understood the core of Confucius's approach, which was relationship. Because the Secretary General would always explain to me, if I'm meeting my Chinese counterpart or my American counterpart or my counterpart from Germany, what are the special implications and feelings? What are the proper rights in order to honor the counterparts? And by honoring those counterparts, he accomplished remarkable things, the Secretary General. In fact, bringing us the two most important agreements of modern times, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. And those are agreements that reached 193 member countries. To do that, you need the wisdom of Confucius. So what does Aristotle bring to this?
May I remind you, you are Aristotle.
And why do I sit as Aristotle and I suggested not as Socrates? Socrates, of course, was declared by the oracle at Delphi as the wisest person in the world. He had great doubts about that, so he spent his life asking people about what is a good life. They could never give a coherent answer. So he finally realized, maybe I am the wisest person because I know I don't know the answers to these questions. And that was his conclusion. But my sense is that his philosophical grandchild, from Socrates to Plato and Plato to Aristotle, did know important answers. Aristotle gave us the two greatest books on this topic of human well-being ever written in the Western tradition. And they come together as a volume. The first is the Nicomachean Ethics, about personal behavior, and it is paired with the Politics, which is the invention of political science, but not Machiavelli's political science. Aristotle's political science is politics for the good, for the human good. Politics based on ethics. Now, Aristotle told us something of enduring value, 2,300 years of enduring value. But I think in the modern age, the first thing Aristotle would have done is to pick up the phone or send a WhatsApp to Confucius and say, could you come over to the Athens Forum? We need to talk.
And here you are.
Because it seems to me like our theories, while they're phrased differently, are really similar, because both of our theories put the essence of a good society in virtue. It's the virtue of the leaders. It's the virtue of the citizens. This is the core of Aristotle's political thought and Confucius's political thought. We lost it in the year 1514 when Machiavelli told us, no, it's not virtue, it's how tricky you can be. And then politics became managing power, not cultivating virtue and well-being. And I believe that we need Aristotle and Confucius back again as our real guides, not the study of power, but the management of human well-being based on virtue. Because we've lost even the concept of this, ladies and gentlemen, of what is a virtuous life. And before we hear from Confucius, I want to say my favorite part about Confucius, because it also exemplifies Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. He said, if we can come to appreciate and understand courtesy and music better, there will be no more war. And I want to put underscoring on courtesy, because it's not even a concept. In my country, no courtesy. We have the right to do this. We do what we want. Nancy Pelosi, we fly to Taiwan because we can do that. No courtesy. If there's no courtesy, there can be no peace. There will only be war. So Confucius has it exactly right. We need courtesy. Thank you. I think that the war and the geopolitical crisis between the U.S. and China is a reflection also of the loss of balance, but not only in the way that it is commonly understood. Aristotle, I guess,
Yes?
I happened to be advisor to President Gorbachev,
That's extraordinary. How did you do that? Were you on a
because when
some
you are,
kind of a
when you are
hotline
the
from
world's
somewhere?
greatest philosopher, you can do all sorts of things. And the advisor to President Yeltsin and the advisor to President Kuchma in the first years of Ukrainian independence. So I saw one crucial thing, which was that at the end of the Cold War, the United States and Germany promised to the Soviet Union and to Russia, if you disband the Warsaw Pact, we will not extend NATO.
You actually witnessed this, Aristotle? You are saying that you witnessed this?
Absolutely.
It's disputed by former Secretary James Baker, you name it.
It is.
You saw, you heard it, you were in the room?
If anybody would like to write to Aristotle's email address, sachs@columbia.edu, I will send you to the archival files that show explicitly how Hans Dietrich Genscher said explicitly, we will not move an inch east, and also how the Secretary General of NATO in the NATO meeting in 1990 said, we will not move east at all.
So, Aristotle, are you blaming the current crisis on the West breaking its promises?
I am blaming the current crisis on the lack of balance and moderation. Absolutely. Because the idea that this is only one side is a myth. This is a crisis that has been brewing for 30 years. And every year, Russia said, please do not come closer to our borders. Please do not come closer to our borders. Please do not come closer to our borders. That's the truth, ladies and gentlemen.
So you
and in 2008, nonetheless, do you interrupt Aristotle?
Well,
Please.
sometimes I'm obliged to. I know you've come a long way. You must be tired, but I feel I have to from time to time.
Please.
No, Aristotle. So these broken promises, they would not have been broken if the leaders had been wise enough to consult you. Is that what you're saying?
We had very wise statesmen who followed Confucian and Aristotelian thought.
You think that you really think they're one and the same?
Like George Kennan, who said in 1997, NATO expansion will lead to the next Cold War. He said it immediately. And we entered a region of crisis. And being Aristotle, I called the White House last year and I said, please stop the NATO enlargement because maybe we can still have peace. But they're not philosophers, they're people of action, and they were not interested in stopping any expansion. They declared 3 times in 2021 that Ukraine will be a member of NATO. We trapped Ukraine in the middle of this battle between these two giants. It's an utter tragedy for Ukraine, an utter tragedy, because if you have Aristotelian prudence, what the Greeks call phronesis, wisdom, contextual wisdom, if you have temperance, moderation, sophrosony in Greek, if you have the sense of justice, excuse my Greek, diokizny. What is it? Diokizny, yes. If you have these virtues, you know, don't push the other side. Don't fly to Taiwan because we have the right to do so. Exercise prudence, moderation, sense of justice, respect for the other side, and then you won't have war. This is what Confucius meant when he said, if you come to understand and appreciate courtesy, we will not have war. Courtesy, please, courtesy.
So, Aristotle, are you in despair?
I am not a pessimist.
Okay.
Because what I teach is that human beings have two sides. They have the sides of selfishness, and they have the sides of virtue. But the goal is to cultivate virtue. Arete in Greek. Excellence, personal excellence, political excellence. And what we teach as philosophers is not that human beings are intrinsically good or intrinsically evil, but they are teachable, that virtue can be cultivated, exactly what my colleague Confucius says, that people can learn virtues. Now, I also know, and I'll just say, it's every generation's responsibility to keep working for virtue, because it's never a done deal. And the greatest philosophers, my teacher, Plato, was attempted 3 times to be an advisor to the governor of Syracuse. He failed all 3 times. It's hard to be a foreign advisor, by the way. They don't listen to you, even to my teacher, Plato. But it doesn't mean you can be pessimistic. It means we have to redouble our efforts at our own virtue, because by cultivating our own virtue, we cultivate the response in others as well. That's the idea of courtesy.